one of the great ways of crypto being used to get attention, to get a group of users to understand and know about your product, and to get them to participate and hopefully return to the product. And so that was the goal of the NFT Mint. We want to create an asset that if you hold it, it means, you're kind of a supporter of Kuma in some ways. The actual process of the NFT sale gave us a lot of exposure as a new brand.
Thanks so much, Alex, for taking the time to be with us on this quick post-mint founder interview. We know each other because we were able to work together recently on a mint on Kingdomly, and you are the founder of Kuma. Do you want to say a little bit about what Kuma is and what your role is at Kuma?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Ethan. Appreciate the opportunity to hop on and chat with you and all the viewers out there. So my name's Alex Wern. I'm co-founder and CEO of Kuma. I've been working in the crypto space for almost a decade now, which feels kind of crazy to say. Some of the viewers may know us from the really kind of pioneered this hybrid design of off-chain order matching with on-chain custody and settlement. I think since our kind of heydays in 2018 to 2020, liquidity pools have demonstrated themselves as being a better method for spot dexes, but perp dexes still are dominated by order book designs. And that's really in large part because of the fact that you're offering leverage. You really need to be able to offer speed, throughput, performance, so that you can be kind of safe and secure in offering that leverage, and also tailor it to market makers who are able to provide the liquidity to make it a competitive product. So the last piece is really what we're all about. We're trying to match the UX of centralized exchanges. We want to pull traders on chain into a non-custodial environment. So you can think of it as pairing the performance and UX of your favorite centralized perpetuals exchanges with the custody and security, as well as transparency of settlement of being on chain for kind of all of the settlement actions. Last kind of highlight piece is we are on a layer 2, which means we are insulated from any sort of like gas spikes or congestion that can happen on layer 1 networks. It allows us to offer a gas-free trading experience, which is really cool for users. You just deposit your funds from any number of EVM chains directly into the application, and you don't need gas at that point. You don't need to sign any additional transactions. We've abstracted that all away. But our collateral is tied into Berachain's L1, which allows us to tap into proof of liquidity. So that's kind of our unique selling point at the moment, is that you're able to trade just like you would on any centralized exchange, but actually use that trading activity to earn BGT emissions in the form of the proof of liquidity. So happy to touch on that a little more later.
Yeah, that's pretty epic, man. I noticed as I was going through your site about those user experience additions that you had mentioned, such as gas delegation and the seamless centralized exchange-like experience, even including an application on the phone. I think that's pretty cool. I haven't downloaded it yet, but I would love to hear more about kind of the core product. I think if I'm speaking for the non-DeFi natives here, that may have sounded like a bunch of gibberish. So why don't we take it to step 1 and just explain really quickly to the audience what a perp dex is and why it's essential in the crypto ecosystem?
Sure. So perpetuals have become the number 1 traded product in crypto. It dominates volumes on centralized exchanges, and we believe that's going to be the case on decentralized exchanges too. And if you look at trends on decentralized spot exchanges, it's been creeping up over time, the market share of spot dexes in comparison to spot centralized exchanges. I think last I checked, it was around 25% of the market was trading on dexes. And we think that's a trend that's only going to continue for a number of reasons. That trend is catching up on the perpetual side, but it's not yet there yet. I think it's at like 6 to 7% penetration. So we think we're still in the early days of this transition from centralized to decentralized perpetuals exchanges. Without going into too much detail, the perpetual is a specific type of derivative. What that means is you're not trading the actual token like ETH or Bitcoin itself. You're using USDC, in our case, as collateral to trade a synthetic version, a derivative version of those assets. What that means for the users, though, is that you're able to deposit USDC collateral, trade the price movements of your favorite tokens, BTC, ETH, Solana, et cetera, and to do so on leverage. So normally if you had 90, whatever it is, $96,500, you could buy one Bitcoin. On a perpetuals exchange, you're able to use leverage to buy multiples of that. Of course, that does increase the risk because you now have the risk of liquidation. The idea being that you're essentially borrowing those extra funds in order to purchase those extra Bitcoin. But people really like it because of capital efficiency. It allows you to have capital in different places. Maybe you've got certain things that you're owning in spot, but you want to trade some of these different, either news or price movements. You don't want to sell all your spot, but you can use just a little bit of even borrow against spot and use that USDC collateral to get larger positions than maybe you would if you were forced to exit other holdings. People also like it because there's opportunities to trade, in our case, assets that don't necessarily live on our layer 2. Like we don't have an integration with the Bitcoin or the Ripple network, but people can trade those assets as if they were live on our product. So a lot of benefits by going the derivatives route in terms of user experience, capital efficiency, and kind of all around trading activity.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. I mean, you touched on a lot of good points going from the evolution of what you believe is going to be the evolution from SEX trading volumes to more decentralized. I think we're seeing a lot of that and we're seeing a lot of people build towards that narrative, like Infinex and some of these other platforms that are like, let's give a centralized exchange-like experience with the benefits of decentralization, like self-custody and other benefits associated with that. Do you see that movement being accelerating for perps more in the coming years as it has with just buying the spot asset, or like how quickly do you think that's going to happen?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so perpetuals, it's absolutely going to be following behind the spot movement. People went on chain for spot products because they were able to get tokens that weren't listed on centralized exchanges. That inventory was kind of the main driving factor. Whereas for perpetuals, you've seen some people try to offer leverage on the long tail tokens, but it's extremely risky game because you're essentially allowing for the potential for insolvency, right? Because if you offer someone to borrow to buy those tokens, well, if the price goes down too fast, you might not get paid back. So that is one thing that I think informed our decision with the staying with the order book model for perpetuals. Was we think that market makers are going to continue to be a key part of that process because they can quote tighter, better, deeper than any other participant in the market. In terms of like kind of tailwinds for moving people on chain, it goes back to like, why are people frustrated with centralized exchanges today? So some of it is like inability to get accounts. People are trying to connect from all over the world. Some places they, for whatever reason, can't service your jurisdiction. Maybe the regulators have banned a particular, operator from that area. And even just the friction of signing up, creating an account, worrying that your funds might be trapped. You see stories of even Coinbase customers, people waking up and saying, hey, like, I can't get my money out of Coinbase. I've been a customer of 7 years for them for 7 years. And, we get it. Those guys have certain requirements that they need to follow in order to custody people's funds. And so that's really the edge that DEXs are able to provide, is by having it all be transparent, non-custodial. There's certain benefits that can be offered to the customer, in particular, the guarantee that your money is always yours, no matter what happens to the kind of exchange side, the UI and the way that you interact with each other through orders. Your money is always going to be yours. You can always withdraw it, out of the collateral contracts and claim your funds. So it's funny. I think, back in 21, 22, people were less focused on that. Then you had a combination of FTX and Celsius, and it brought a big spotlight back to the risks of centralized custody. And then again, the Coinbase example is like, I can't think of a more trustworthy custodian from like a reputation and technology perspective, right? I think Coinbase is probably where I would store my money if I was going to go into a 10-year coma. But at the same time, you see stories of people being unable to get their funds, getting accounts closed for, whatever reasons that they're determining behind the scenes.
Yeah, incredible. It's obvious that you live and breathe this and think of it not just from a specific, financial asset perspective, but also like the entire user experience and what exists in the current market. So to recap, what you said is that essentially maybe there's a slower velocity to move on chain with perpetuals than there is just the spot assets, because the majority of the reason people were moving purely on chain was to chase newer spot assets that don't necessarily make sense for perpetuals because of the risk associated with them. Whereas maybe some of the big three, you think BTC, ETH, Sol, or maybe some of the other assets like Ripple and other L1s that are up and coming, maybe it does make more sense to have perpetuals. So because of a lower velocity of kind of new perpetual products coming out or new assets to provide perpetuals around, then it doesn't. Then there isn't necessarily that burning need to move towards a decentralized experience for reasons that are pure to the product. Now, to give respect to the product experience as a whole, you mentioned things. Problems with centralized exchanges surrounding onboarding problems, right? Like KYC and regulatory issues, and then also custodial problems. Those are kind of the two that I hear as well. Security problems as well, although we haven't had I guess you could say Bybit recently, but there hasn't been too many massive security issues with centralized exchanges that have truly been their downfall, kind of like the unless you consider the liquidity crisis of FTX and Alameda a security issue. But
a couple quick comments on that. So, we found in 2017, 2018, like kind of the first iteration of the product, security is like a latent, like lower order concern for users until it's the number one concern, right? And it's like, same with, your account getting locked, right? You're like, I still use Coinbase, right? They have a good product. I use them for a lot of things. If my account gets locked, I'm probably never going back, right? It's like, it's one of those things where you see the tweets and you ignore them until it's you. So that, I think, creates a slow but steadily growing pool of people who are going to have those types of experiences or observe enough of them that as these products catch up in terms of UX, they're going to start to make the switch. And then that second piece is another extremely important one, where our first iteration, maybe just to touch on like a couple of the problems that we've had to solve over the years. The biggest one was just congestion and gas fees. So like things were going great for the first iteration of our product. Then CryptoKitties launched and brought the gas price up 400x. All of a sudden, to do a $100 trade, you're paying $30 in gas. It's like, okay, cool. That whole model just doesn't work, right? So we had to then adapt and figure out layer twos. And now we have our own layer two, which actually means we're insulated from any other application, NFT drop, big mint, big event, from interfering with our ability to get transactions through cheaply enough that we can actually subsidize them, right? So we can have a gas-free trading experience. Another one is around like the wallet side. So actually our very first version, we allowed people to log in by pasting their private key into the application and actually logging directly into the browser. In hindsight, that probably was like a bad user pattern to be teaching people to like, this was the early days, right? MetaMask had barely launched, it's just like, we'll just store it in browser. It made for a great trading experience, but obviously that's not the most secure way. And most people use hardware wallets or at least software wallets, ideally hardware wallet to protect those funds that they're using. So we had to come up with another way with what we call session keys. The idea is that you can use your, call it primary custody key, whether that's a hardware or a software wallet, to authorize, and this happens immediately when you unlock your wallet, authorize a second key, which is only authorized at the smart contract level to do trades. So that key is stored in your browser securely. Even if someone were to get a hold of your device, like say they stole your computer, the best they could do is actually just trade on your behalf, right? They can't actually go and withdraw any of the funds because we've segmented custody from the ability to make trading or make trades. And then you couple that with things like Infinex, which has been solved, the like, how do I as a casual user manage private keys and make sure that I don't lose them and log in to the custody wallet securely. Now you have like a really compelling user experience, right? Where Infinex is like the really easy to use kind of wallet from the customer's perspective. They connect it to our platform, they unlock it. They don't even know that actually behind the scenes, we've added this extra security layer to make sure that they're protected. And the only thing that, really can be done is this trading experience. And last point on that is that's what allows for cool things like our mobile experience. So we have a QR code that you can scan, that what's going on behind the scenes is it's actually creating a delegated key and storing it, or a session key, and storing it on your mobile device. So similarly, you can go and you can trade on the go with that trade only key while keeping your hardware wallet locked up and secure behind, or whatever device has your custody key. So there's a couple examples of, like, it's been interesting from my perspective. I debate all the time, like, are we early or are we just building stuff that we're not quite sure where we're going as an industry? And I think our product is a great example of, like, no, there's so many things where we truly are early. It's been 8-10 years of the building blocks across custody, scalability, even just like user behavior and getting them to understand what all this stuff means and does, building up that body of work to the point where larger applications, more viral applications have the chance to launch.
That's absolutely incredible. And falls in line 100% with what I've seen too. I haven't been a builder for 8 years, been in crypto for 10 years, but I do remember messing around in the ICO boom of 2017, buying ETH, baiting CryptoKitties. Wish I hadn't have done that. And sort of just watching the technology evolve over time. I mean, what you just said I'd say points to the fact that you've seen this happen. And I know that there's a saying of, we overestimate what we can get done in 1 year and underestimate what we can get done in 10. And I mean, truly the level of improvement that we've seen out of blockchain technology just over the past 4 years is incredible. I mean, 4 years ago, we were debating zero knowledge proofs, zero knowledge rollups versus optimistic rollups. There's still dominant sidechain strategies. It was the Cosmos multi-chain type strategy last cycle, and there wasn't too many layer twos. I mean, not too many that were extremely popular last cycle that I can truly remember. And now with layer twos, you have lower gas. And so platforms like you can then do gas abstraction and, account abstraction, like you mentioned, with the kind of Infinex type experience. And all of these things can play together to almost build a Web 2-like experience on top of this incredible Web 3 technology. I remember there was an age-old debate about, like, what do we need first, like deeper, better infrastructure? Do we need, better consumer applications? And the answer is a mix of both. Consumer applications drive interest in the technology. Interest in the technology drives revenue for all of the infrastructure and, all of the layers of service. And then that interest then allows us to fund and prove the thesis to continue to build out the infrastructure to support new and more interesting applications. I see it as a flywheel, but I would love to hear a bit more on your reflection as a builder over that period of time. Maybe you could dive in a bit more to why you've chosen to structure your product the way that you have. You mentioned that there is, I believe it's an off-chain order book, but on-chain actions. I want to hear more about that. And please speak like you're speaking to somebody who really only knows how AMMs work from Whiteboard Crypto YouTube videos, because that's my background. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are newer to DeFi and want to understand this at a high level, and also understand what you do.
Cool. Sounds good. Yeah, the last comment on your point about usage and adoption requiring the underlying infrastructure to kind of level up. I think that's absolutely true. I am hopeful that now we've got the base pieces in place. Like one of the things that's going to be tough for us is because of the inherent financialization of all of this infrastructure and applications. There's a big spotlight on the industry right? And so I think we've got a couple years to really deliver on some compelling use cases, given the amount of time and attention and money that we've poured into it. I think that's the case, but it's we're not building in the shadows anymore, right? We don't have that luxury of being like whatever the internet and email in the 1980s, where nobody's paying attention to it, and it's just a couple people in kind of an academic environment. So just briefly to touch on why we structured our product this way. As I mentioned, for something like perpetuals, speed, latency, and performance are extremely important. So anytime you're dealing with leverage, you need to be able to move quickly to limit the risk to traders and to the underlying exchange and the protocol. You also need that speed for market makers because it allows them to quote tighter and deeper, quote meaning they can show orders of a larger size and closer to each other. Ultimately, this leads to a better user experience. So if you're going and you're buying Bitcoin perp, you get better pricing, less slippage. You're probably familiar with slippage from AMMs, right? So you get overall a better trading experience because of this. So that's really the kind of off-chain hybrid component, is really figuring out where is it important to decentralize and where is it important to maintain performance and throughput. Now we pair that off-chain matching and execution with smart contracts for on-chain custody and settlement. And this was us just looking at like, what do we see as the really big selling points of this type of this type of product in comparison to centralized exchanges. And it goes back to the ease of onboarding. You just move your collateral from your wallet into the custody, into the collateral contracts, and you're good to trade. It also is the ability to always withdraw your collateral from those contracts. So that's something that we can guarantee at the smart contract level, right? Like our code has been audited. Users can see that at all times they're in control of those funds. Should anything happen to the rest of the application, you can always go to the contracts and pull those funds out. Or, should for whatever reason, basically you're not going to run into the, I won't pick on Coinbase again, but call it the centralized exchange problem where you're unable to withdraw for whatever reason. And it also brings about a level of transparency. So anytime that you're dealing with leverage, there's the risk of accounts reaching their margin requirements. That means it's not valuable enough anymore to warrant the size of the position, the amount of assets that you've purchased, and that collateral, that position needs to be liquidated. So in this case, we can actually show provably that the price of what you were trading moved to the certain level so that it was a correct decision to actually liquidate that account based on the terms and kind of conditions of the way those markets are designed. So those are just some cool kind of things that it can bring about in terms of like transparency, security, and that user experience. The other things that it allows us to do is to build additional primitives on top of it. So one that we're excited about is our advanced vaults feature that's coming out soon. So you're familiar with AMMs and liquidity pools, the idea that a user will deposit assets, and that's kind of a two-sided liquidity pool to make those markets. Perpetuals don't work like that. It's not one asset trading against another. As I mentioned, it's a pool of collateral, in our case, USDC. So the advanced vaults will allow for market makers or individual users to create a vault where users can deposit as LPs, and then that vault manager is responsible for the trading portion of kind of the equation, right? So you've got, think of it as like AMM is the automated market maker, right? The formula dictates how it's traded. In this case, you've got a vault manager that dictates how it's traded. And there's some cool things that we can do there. One of them, we're working with some of the market makers to create some fixed yield, some fixed return vaults. So this means they can offer, call it 12, 14% APR. Those market makers can then use those funds to quote and provide liquidity on Kuma. And the users, they're essentially promising the users that kind of fixed return in a percentage perspective. Market makers really want capital efficiency, and having to park capital in different places can be expensive. So if they can get a loan essentially from these LPs at a rate, that's pretty favorable to very good for the LPs, but also favorable to the market maker, that's something that we found is really attractive. And you can build in all sorts of additional protections in that smart contract process. So you can even have things where if the vault, the market makers required to post their own percentage of collateral against the money that's in the LP vault. And if the LP vault starts to dip in value to the point where the market maker's collateral is about to no longer cover that, then it can immediately close positions and users can make sure that they get their funds back. So it's kind of mixing together some other models we've seen where market makers in particular can borrow uncollateralized from different venues. But by putting that borrow lend market within the same venue in which they're trading, there's some pretty cool protections and things that we can do using smart contracts. So that's a lot of where our focus is going to be is, all right, we've got the base kind of core exchange product. We haven't touched much on the features, but it's, essentially we've really focused on making the UI UX on par with your favorite centralized exchange. And then it's about how do we get that network effect going of liquidity and trading volume, because the best tech product in the world, especially for something that's network based like an exchange, isn't going anywhere unless you have the liquidity user volume kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, that is truly a loop to behold, right? Because you need the liquidity in order to offer the perps, but then you also need demand in order to incentivize liquidity to come there, especially sustainable demand, because I think a lot of people want to park their liquidity somewhere and just kind of loop it in and continue to keep it there. So what you're telling me is that there's kind of two sides to your product, where there's the side where you can go trade perps, but then there's also the side where you can provide liquidity on the back end for different rates and work with market makers to essentially provide what's necessary for people to go trade those perps on the front end. Is that correct? Is that a good way to think about it? And do you want to expound on that?
That's a great summary. I'll probably start using that. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And, again, the idea is, so you've seen this a lot where a product launches, it uses some sort of incentive program to get people in the door, but why are they going to stick around? Our thesis of why people will stick around is that it's actually an extremely compelling alternative to centralized exchanges. And this is the feedback that we're hearing from users, right? Like we've got quotes like, hey, I've tried all the perp dexes and yours is the best. I love the features that you've got. The performance is amazing, like very impressive job with the platform. And then they maybe if they have any complaints, it's would like more liquidity, right? So we've got 5 or 6 market makers that are dedicated and quoting, and the liquidity is definitely good, but it could absolutely be better. And if our goal is to pull people from Binance and Bybit, we really need to be pretty close to competitive with those exchanges. For, certainly there's a size level where we'll get there eventually, but anyone trading hundreds of thousands, $200,000, we want to be competitive with what they're offering on those centralized exchanges, because then it allows us to rest on those other value propositions of, hey, like you don't have to worry about getting blocked from your account when you trade here, right? You don't have to worry about withdrawals times being delayed or some of the frustrations that can come with centralized exchanges. And so that's really about why we've thought very carefully about these two sides of the market. Like, let's give those who are not perp traders a way to earn a yield, and do so in a way that makes it better for the other side of the market, those who are perp traders who are interested in what we have to offer from like a product perspective. And then maybe just to touch on, that's where we're using the BGT, proof of liquidity incentives, that we're tapping into Berachain, which is pretty cool. We've managed to create a way that your trading activity actually determines trading activity and in some ways referrals. So anything that brings volume, activity, and users to the platform determines the share of BGT emissions that you're earning. And so you can start to see we're building this out in kind of a piecemeal fashion of nail the product, which we've done, get the users and the traders to start coming against the market makers that are already there, get that volume loop going and build that up over time, and then layer on additional liquidity from passive LPs. And now you can see how that feedback loop can start to get going, and you bootstrap your way into a product that's truly competitive with, and even in many ways, as I described, better than what you're going to get from centralized exchanges.
Yeah, that's an incredible way to put it. I guess my thoughts is this is why Berachain and POL makes perfect sense for you guys. It makes perfect sense because you guys are trying to bootstrap that liquidity into the protocol. And if you can bootstrap that liquidity into the protocol, you sort of have the same, you can provide the same user experience as centralized exchanges. And if you can provide the same user experience as centralized exchanges with a reduction of the risk on the profile side, keeping it decentralized, self-custodial, and not having to worry about that user onboarding friction, then you're going to be able to slowly take ground and market share back from them. Is that correct?
That's the goal. Yeah, that's absolutely right. Yep.
Sorry about that. I had a roommate come in right as I was sharing my breakdown of my understanding, but it's good. I mean, it feels good, man, having this feedback. It's obvious you know exactly what you're doing in this market, and it's really cool to see because I come from the NFT background. You know, I like to think about DeFi. I like to think about that stuff. I also have a finance major, but a lot of this stuff still feels really ethereal to me. Like, how are we rewarding people using chain emissions? Like, what is this new novel consensus mechanism? And then how are DeFi mechanisms taking advantage of that? As far as I've heard, it sounds like you guys have one of the most interesting and complex ways to distribute those BGT emissions, right? You said that there's multiple different ways to earn it based on trading activity, perhaps potential liquidity provisioning as well. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight into what's going on the back end there, how you guys thought about it? Like, I'm assuming, you have multiple ways to receive that receipt token, but the same receipt token and maybe some type of leaderboard that's weighted depending, maybe emissions of those receipt tokens are weighted depending on how much liquidity was provided or how much trading activity. I would love to just dip into that a little bit.
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question. So first off, you're absolutely right. Berachain was immediately clicked for us because, as I mentioned a couple times, our goal is to build a narrative, get people to pay attention and say, what is this? Show up, ideally, all at the same time, which by all being there at the same time makes it a better product and actually gets us over that kind of cold start problem. And that's the goals of proof of liquidity, which the idea that, hey, let's try to there's always excitement around new chain launches. Let's take that excitement from an emissions perspective, funnel it into applications so that they can help bootstrap, especially anything financial in particular that depends on liquidity and users all being there at the same time. Let's jumpstart that process, get over the cold start problem by using the network value itself. So that immediately resonated with us in the problems we were trying to solve as an application layer. In terms of the way it's working behind the scenes, so you're right. Normally, maybe not normally, but the kind of traditional way to think about proof of liquidity is it's what it sounds like, proof of providing liquidity. So the simplest example would be like a borrow lending market, like an Aave type market or Beralend on Berachain. You would deposit your collateral into the contract. I'm depositing ETH or Bera. I then get a receipt token, which reflects my deposit. I put that receipt token over in the liquidity mining. It's called the rewards vault. And based on my share of that vault, that's this percentage of BGT emissions that I get. So if I am half of the deposits, I'm getting half of the emissions. The challenge for us is that deposits inherently, if they're not doing anything, aren't really valuable to us, right? We don't just want to grow TVL. That TVL actually has to be active. It needs to be used to show orders on the books, or someone needs to be trading and actually using that collateral to be a participant in the exchange. So that's where there's a mechanism that allows the protocol itself to essentially mint and burn the receipt tokens based on whatever it is that you want to measure. So ours is a collection currently centered around trading volume and referral volume. So bringing in others into the application itself. And then with the launch of vaults, we'll be adding in the LP component as well to those ways that you can get the receipt token. But it's tricky, right? We have to be, one of the things that we had to build up kind of an internal system or muscle for was being ruthless against wash traders, because you can imagine people coming in and saying, well, okay, you're giving away BGT for volume and trading, I'm just going to trade back and forth between myself and, take zero risk and take all the rewards. So we've actually we've got, AI is largely or a lot to thank for this. We built a system that, these are kind of the rules and patterns that we're looking for. And, we've been able to restrict the rewards to those who are actually traders. And for them, it's awesome because you get to trade like you normally do. Whatever you see a news article, or kind of a news announcement, certainly no shortage of volatility lately. You can put on that position and you get kind of an extra boost to your profitability based on the BGT emissions that are going to those that are trading. So that's been a big driving factor for a lot of the initial users that we've acquired.
That's crazy. I mean, did you guys build that yourself? You didn't partner with anybody maybe on because I'm assuming you have two components, right? There's the AI, and then you need also like index or scan all transactions to determine what type of wallet behavior is somewhat bot-like or manufactured at least, and then what is not. Like, did you partner with anybody on that side of it, that component, or did you guys build that from the ground up yourself?
No, we built that ourselves, and it honestly, that wasn't. We've had to build a lot of really difficult tech, and I would not put that up there with the most difficult. But I'd say probably the matching engine and the contracts and the interaction between those two is the most extreme form of development we've ever done. Just one small example for those who may understand. You've got one of the biggest challenges is rounding, because you've got on-chain a certain level of precision. 18 decibels is like how your EVM tokens, how far they can go. Off-chain, what do you do when it rounds to a 19th decibel, right? When you do the math and there's a 19th decibel. And that's one of the examples of these things get so nuanced and so nitty gritty in terms of how to handle them. So getting these two systems to talk to one another consistently and without fail in all conditions, regardless of what the user behavior is, that has been probably our biggest challenge, I'd say.
Yeah, that's pretty sick. I would absolutely love to know exactly how that works. I mean, do you have like a graphic or something like that? Maybe after the call I could go study, just because, I mean, I like to nerd out about this stuff and understand how it works, especially off-chain and on-chain functionality. Trying to pair that's really difficult because, like you mentioned, there are parameters, even like contract limits, that make it difficult to really pair the off-chain functionality that's extremely robust in your guys' case, and in most cases where there's hybrid applications, and then pairing that with something as rigid and as, maybe I guess I'd say more rigid in solidity in smart contracts. So that does really interest me. And I think that sounds, like quite the technical problem. So I could see why you would say that this AI indexing and exploring wallet behavior was a piece of cake. So what you're telling me is you guys could build RCAM and
maybe, yeah. Maybe that's
you just need some UI on top of it.
Potential. If things don't work out in a couple of years, maybe that's a potential pivot for us. We were actually talking with one of the big centralized exchange perpetuals, like CTOs, and he was saying, we do every X number of actions, we do checks to make sure that the balances are within some small tolerance, that there's not kind of like drifting. And we're like, we literally everything is doing that check, every action, because it's all validated on chain via the smart contracts, right? So like that's kind of another maybe just kind of a subtle thing of FTX was straight up fraud, but there's also, these things are hard, and you can have just systems that misbehave and lead to kind of inconsistencies, issues with balances not lining up, like that sort of stuff. It doesn't necessarily have to be malicious for something to go awry. So that's just another point to emphasize, that like smart contract enforcement, to me, that's like clearly the future of a lot of these things. And I think that's what we're going to see. Maybe back to that initial point of what's coming over the next few years. I think now the technology and distribution is to the point where it doesn't have to necessarily be this massive like 10x improvement over the existing system, as long as it is a good improvement on either like capital efficiency for people who are waiting for things for a couple of days to settle. If they can get it instantly via tokens, that's valuable, right? Like we see that with stable coins. Just simply a dollar that settles immediately over blockchain is super valuable. And what other things are we saying, hey, they're good enough today? I've got, Zelle and Venmo or whatever, that actually, they feel marginal, but actually they can be a huge improvement for, certain subset or a large portion of the population.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. And it's obvious you've thought a lot about like where the market is, where it's going, and how to try and stay on top of that over time. I have a couple quick questions for you, and just thinking forward. We're looking at an administration that's a lot more friendly to crypto from a regulatory perspective. Your guys' product makes sense outside of meme coin speculation, et cetera. So inevitably, when more real world financial assets, things that do fluctuate, but maybe don't fluctuate as heavily as some of these just native on-chain assets come on-chain, like how do you expect that? Is that something you guys think about? Is that something you guys talk to key partners, investors about? Is just the idea that more regulatory clarity and bringing crypto back to America might end up leading to just a lot more volume of on-chain assets that just in general, and how that might impact your guys' product?
Yeah, it's a great question. From my seat, I've seen really there's two worlds of like RWA tokenization. And this is, close enough related that I'm happy to give you my thoughts on it. So one is, I would say, like TradFi, for lack of a better word, tokenizing their existing businesses and relationships for improvements from like a capital efficiency perspective. So you've seen like R3 and Corda and the DTCC lately announced that they're doing some sort of blockchain-based thing for issuing ownership on their own ledger. All that sort of stuff is about, to me, freeing up those assets and removing the like slow friction that comes from the settlement process. Because if you bought something but don't yet own it, you've got this limbo period where it's kind of like tied up. You can't pledge it as collateral, right? You actually need to, if you've got margin requirements, maybe you have to pull money from another place. So just like simply that efficiency, when we talk to like TradFi, frees up tens of billions of dollars a year just by simply having it be instantly transferable. And these seems to be coalescing around a bunch of different solutions that I think will eventually talk to each other and allow for that, kind of big improvement in capital efficiency. And that's kind of one world. That is existing financial institutions adopting the technology to be more efficient and talk to one another. But still, it's like that same group of parties. You'll go through a broker, right? You'll still like have those relationships that you as an individual user need to get access to those markets. And then the flip side is like, how do we pull these RWAs onto these open public networks? And that's the side that I'm more excited about. I think that pull, I ascribe to the guys from Alliance, their thesis of like what's going to pull RWAs on chain. It's going to be crypto degens maturing and looking to diversify and like not wanting to leave the on-chain environment. Like there's a lot of capital, stable coins are continuing to grow. People are very comfortable holding assets on chain, and maybe they want them readily available because there's still a lot of, like if you see something that you're excited about and you have to come from a bank account into an on-ramp into your wallet, like that's a multi-day process for any sort of size, right? So being able to manage, like I personally, and I imagine many others, I essentially have two buckets of things that I own, right? It's like my normal stuff and my crypto stuff, right? And they like basically never overlap unless I'm, doing the rare kind of like rebalancing from one to another. So I see that people wanting to blur those, people wanting to have like crypto version of a more traditional portfolio, whether that be indexes or actual stocks themselves. How that manifests, I think, is to be determined. I think there's some cool startups that are working on the tokenization piece, giving kind of like the spot version. And then there's some others working on essentially the derivative piece, right? Like a perpetual that allows you to get exposure to those assets without having to own them directly. So, to kind of summarize and answer your question, I think it's absolutely inevitable. I think you're going to see it from an efficiency perspective in TradFi businesses. And I think there's going to be a demand component over time that will pull these assets on chain to the point where if you want to, you never have to leave a blockchain network and you can access all sorts of assets. And I think that's maybe not as compelling to those of us in the United States or other, kind of major Western countries. But there's many regions, like I've talked to startups who are servicing countries where they don't have access to the S&P or companies listed on those markets. And they use iPhones, but can't buy Apple, right? And so just like maybe a kind of trite example, but being able to give them the ability to invest in markets around the world is a very compelling use case for them. And I think it's also something that will call it regulatory arbitrage or just like some sort of efficiency improvement, that will help pull those assets on chain as well.
That is, a pretty incredible answer. I love that. I love the aspect, especially at the end there, of like opening up custody of assets that were otherwise really difficult, or there's a lot of user friction in owning in some of these other countries, right? It's not the sexiest thing to talk about because a lot of these countries may not represent a ridiculous amount of purchasing power like the US does. But I mean, the fact that in Argentina, you can now easily custody US dollar in the form of USDC, or, what's similar to US dollar. I know that it's backed by treasury or some other asset. But the fact that you can hold a US dollar equivalent and be able to transact in that in some of these other countries where a lot of, banks don't support US dollar deposits, or it's a bit more difficult to do so. And just to be able to do that by default and have self-custodial options over that is pretty incredible. And I could totally see that spilling out into other assets that are a bit up the risk curve from stablecoins, but far less risky than the traditional on-chain assets that we have, right? It's like, it's not Bitcoin, it's not Ethereum, and then anything else is a little bit more risky even in on-chain native assets. So right. I could definitely see how that would positively impact you guys and everything like that. But I know that we've been running for 50 minutes, dude, and I mean, I don't want to take up all of your time. I know that you maybe allocated some time for this, but I just wanted to wrap up with maybe some questions more about the NFT side of what you did, why you decided to do it, and would also love to hear what your experience was with us. And you can say anything, as well, if you'd like to say some critical feedback, and we can cut it off too. You're welcome to do that.
Cool. No, first off, the experience was awesome. Nothing but props for the Kingdomly team. It was a white glove service all the way through. So, I talked about some of the challenges of what we're trying to build and really where we are, our current stage. It all boils down to momentum and that network effect and really kind of a creating community, right? Getting people to all show up at the same time. And NFTs are one of the great ways of crypto being used to get attention, to get a group of users to understand and know about your product, and to get them to participate and hopefully return to the product. And so that was the goal of the NFT Mint. We want to create an asset that if you hold it, it means, you're kind of a supporter of Kuma in some ways. The actual process of the NFT sale gave us a lot of exposure as a new brand. I mentioned it briefly, the pivot from IDEX to Kuma was strategic so that we could kind of redefine ourselves under this new brand rather than having what people thought about IDEX before. But it also meant we were working to reacquire that exposure and that following and those users that are aware of who we are. So, the NFT event was a huge success from that perspective. And then it also gives us a way to engage directly with those NFT holders. So, we don't know how we're going to use it yet, but if you've got, I guess to just say, we don't know precisely what we're going to do yet, but we've got a ton of different ideas. And if you think about exchanges, for the longest time have had VIP tiers associated with benefits, lower fees, maybe different giveaways, different kind of promotions that you can participate in. And we think that the NFT is an way to incorporate a lot of those different features that you've historically used to encourage and support kind of your most loyal customers, and we can do it through the NFT method. On top of that, we had a lot of fun doing the art. I think it's going to be really cool. We do the art reveal. The team worked really hard on that. As I said, it's like, the NFT for us is obviously not our primary product. We're doing it in support of Kuma. That said, we have a very high bar for everything we do. We don't want to release something that's half-assed or going to get flamed for looking cheap. I guess what's the best one that comes to mind? I'm thinking I forget the name. It was some guy who actually got coined. Some hilariously NFT reveal that was just ugly as sin. So yeah, we put a lot of time and pride in making sure that it's actually a high quality experience for those. But again, we wanted to make it a free mint because we wanted it to just be something to engage with the community with. And then lastly, just maybe to touch on Kingdomly, you guys were awesome. We've got our hands full with a ton of different dev efforts. I'm confident our team could have figured out the right way to do an NFT mint and created a page and all the different things that go on behind the scenes to create the contracts and stage it that way you guys did. But being able to have a partner that has done this before that can help with the technical execution, as well as the marketing aspect of getting partners within the Barrett ecosystem, that was immensely valuable. And candidly, there's no way we would have done this without Kingdomly, at least not done it right now without Kingdomly, right? Because of the level of effort it would have required. So big props to you guys for such a great job there.
Yeah, thanks so much, man. That is, Alex, that's music to my ears, man. Just from this hour of being able to talk to you, I have no doubt you guys would have been able to crush it and handle it technically without us. But to know that you found value in working with us and that we saved maybe some time and energy so that you guys could focus on your core protocol, what you guys have been doing for the past 8 years, and then also what you continue to want to do into the future. That's why we exist, man. I realized that there was no easy way for great protocol founders to really bootstrap their community and their protocol. And we wanted to help them do that with NFTs, but not give them, reduce that burden of having to create a custom contract, having to spin up the front end for it, having to get that thing audited. All of that stuff produces a lot of friction for a team that is just trying to cook and build the best product possible. And so it's interesting because inevitably what that did was create better collections, because now they're tied to great founders and protocols like yourself. The time that we save protocol founders also means that now all of a sudden the possibility and realm for doing a great collection can extend into people like yourself who are extremely knowledgeable about what you're doing and could do a great collection, but maybe it's not worth it with the time and energy that you could also put into furthering your product. So that is exactly what we like to hear, man. That's why we exist. We really do believe that that most founders are heads down building great products like yourself and don't get a whole lot of time to figure out the best way to bootstrap community. So we're super excited for that final reveal. I want to call it a pre-reveal because that's what we kind of call it in the industry, but it doesn't, it's a post reveal, I guess. But Alex, is there any last things you want to share maybe about kind of what's coming up for Kuma, what you're most excited about over the coming weeks? We got about 4 minutes left.
Yeah, sure. Just a last minute plug. First off, thanks for the opportunity to come on. Really enjoyed the conversation. Like that we got to touch on a bunch of things, not just directly related to Kuma. Hopefully it gave the audience some insight into how we think about the space in general, what we're trying to accomplish with our product. If you want to check it out, go to kuma.bid. You can sign up, I guess not even sign up, connect your wallet, easily move your funds into the application from any number of EVM chains, and start trading and earning BGT. As I mentioned, we're going to be releasing the LP vaults here shortly. So that'll be an opportunity for those of you who aren't perp traders to earn some yield. We'll also be directing some of the BGT emissions towards those LP vaults. So that'll be another way for you to get involved and start supporting the exchange. And then, give us a follow on social. We're on Twitter, kuma.bid, Kuma, DOTBID.
Epic. Yeah. Well, I hope those users I hope the listeners were paying attention because sounds like there might be some pretty juicy BGT rewards in using your product in the near future. So super excited for that. I know all the bears listening are excited for that. Alex, thank you so much for your time, man. Really appreciate having you on, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Cool. Likewise. Appreciate it.